Hello, I'm Francisco and this is What the Book, the show where we use literature to talk about history. Confession time. When I teach history, I like to assign readings that are not just about history, but literature from the time periods we're talking about. I do this for two reasons. One, I like to read fiction. And two, I think it's useful to experience a time period's viewpoints by actually reading what people from that time had to say. I don't teach literature, so we don't really focus on literary symbols or plots or character development. What we do here is we try to figure out what these literary works can tell us about the time when they were produced. With that in mind, let's talk about The Master and Margarita. The author, Mikhail Bulgakov, was born in Kiev, which was then in the Russian Empire, in 1891. He lived through the Russian Revolution, the Russian Civil War, the creation of the Soviet Union, and the first 18 years of Stalin's dictatorship. He went to university to study medicine, which is why a lot of his books talk about being a doctor in Russia. And he was addicted to morphine, so drug addiction also shows up frequently in his writing. If you want a taste of his work before committing to a long book like The Master and Margarita, allow me to suggest A Young Doctor's Notebook, either the book or the TV series. Daniel Radcliffe and John Hamm are in it, it's good. But anyway, Bulgakov was one of those Soviet writers that opposed Stalin's regime, but he also had some health issues and didn't really want to leave his home, so exile was out of the question for him, and he mostly hid his most explosive work from the authorities. The Master and Margarita, his last novel, was published more than 20 years after his death, and with good reason, because it's pretty weird. But good weird, not weird, I promise. It is a novel with two storylines that are told at the same time. One in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, and another one in ancient Jerusalem in the 30s. In the Russian part of the novel, we are shown the Soviet Union under Stalin, and what we see is that everything everyone does is based on pursuing ideals. For whatever reason, Soviet socialism is all about striving to be perfect, and justifying all kinds of impractical and immoral acts in the name of socialism. So in this context, the devil, calling himself Professor Voland, shows up and starts showing the Soviets that it's honestly great that they have ideals, but they can't ignore that these ideals are A, made up in someone's head, and B, mostly useless when you take them to the extreme. For example, in the very first and most famous scene in the book, a Soviet writer and a Soviet editor are having a discussion about how atheism is great, because religion is just another way for capitalism to exploit workers, so being an atheist makes so much sense. The devil, also known as Professor Voland, shows up and he's like, you know, it's fine if you don't want to believe Jesus was God or whatever, but to say he couldn't have existed, I mean, that's kinda dumb. Because he was human. He kinda did exist. I could prove it to you. And the Soviets are like, oh my god, you're trying to shove religion down our throats. And Voland is like, fine, let me show you. So they travel back in time to Jerusalem in the time of Jesus Christ, and it turns out that Jesus and this whole thing was real, but not like most people imagine it. Jesus, also known as Yeshua HaNosri, was actually just a well-meaning hippie telling people to be nicer to each other, and the Jews wanted to get rid of him, just like they got rid of most hippies of his type. Pontius Pilate, on the other hand, was a Roman general who was mostly pissed that he had been sent to handle hippies in Palestine, and he had a terrible headache that day, so he was like, why are you making me work extra today? What did you do to make the Jewish authorities dislike you so much? I just want to spend time with my dog. And Yeshua was like, I don't know. The Jewish high priests are being weird about me because my only disciple, Matthew Levi, is too stupid to actually write down the things I say. So he makes all my speeches sound inflammatory and they're actually not. And Pilate was like, oh my god, I care so little, it hurts. Just go get crucified already. Then the book takes us back to Moscow in the 1930s, and Voland is like, see, Jesus was real. And the two Soviets literally go insane, because they cannot handle that their socialist ideals are wrong for such a stupid reason. Similar situations happen over and over again in the book, where Soviets show how their life revolves around pursuing socialist ideals. Voland shows up, and with the help of his squad, shows them that it's all nonsense. By the way, yeah, Voland has a squad. It's made up of his assistant and translator Koroviev, or Fagoto, who tends to be the person that deals with the Soviets and messes them up over and over again. He is described as wearing checkers, a pince nez, and a jockey cap. Azazello, who is a red-haired demon that dresses in stripes, has a chicken leg in his shirt pocket, wears a bowler hat, and enjoys doing the dirty work for Voland's plans, like cutting people's heads off and getting into fights and stuff like that. Hela, who is a female vampire that is described as beautiful and perfect in every way, and apparently has a day job caring for Voland at home, because she's a vampire, so she lives mostly at night. And Behemoth, a large anthropomorphic cat that kind of functions as the comic relief in Voland's squad. He is violent, but he's also funny, and the least respected member of the squad, so it's fine, like, don't worry about it. Voland and his squad are basically a more interesting version of Scooby-Doo and his gang. All the Soviets that encounter Voland and his squad end up either dead or insane, except two. The Master, who is never given a name, but is a writer who is already in the psychiatric hospital where a lot of the other characters end up, because he wrote the real story about Jesus and Pontius Pilate, but the Soviet authorities didn't really see the point of publishing such a boring story, even if it was true. So he became super unhappy, tried to burn the manuscript, and then went to live in the psychiatric hospital on his own. And Margarita, who is married to a Soviet official and therefore is rich in a socialist country, which makes no sense, but she doesn't care about all that. She's super unhappy, and that is why she becomes the Master's mistress and #1 fan of his writing. At some point in the story, Margarita makes a pact with Voland where she becomes a witch, celebrates a witch's feast with the help of her former servant who is now also a witch, and in exchange asks Voland to give her back the Master. Voland is like, sure, whatever, have at it. And then the Master and Margarita spend the rest of eternity together. Not happily ever after, but content ever after, because they are finally able to be themselves without any useless ideals to cloud their judgment. Also, the place where they end up is the same mountain where Pontius Pilate has spent the last 2,000 years just hanging out, chilling, with his dog. Links to the book are in the description below. One of the first themes we can find in this book is that of socialism not as a theory, but as idealism. That is, the Soviets in the book could probably not tell us more about Marxist ideas than they could about other economic theories, because the socialist system they are living under is based on focusing on the short and medium-term goals that need to be achieved for the ideal of communism to be possible. Everyone in the book tries to do their part to pursue the ideals of communism through socialism, and they never realize that these ideals only exist in their minds. What's actually real, and what they only stop ignoring once Voland shows them how it is, are the jobs they have and the people around them and their feelings. The only two characters that ever notice how unhappy they are and how bleak the situation is in the Soviet Union are, precisely, the Master and Margarita. Another historical theme in this book is that of authoritarianism and terror. Bulgakov never makes it explicit, but the characters in the book are constantly aware of the government's power to force them to do things they do not want to do. And they are also scared of the consequences of maybe not being perfect socialists. When someone somehow doesn't show up to work, they get worried, but asking about them is pointless. They know Stalin probably disappeared them. When someone breaks the rules of Soviet socialism for their personal benefit, for example by accepting foreign money in exchange for a service, and they get caught, they are scared of the consequences, but they're not surprised by them. The Soviet Union under Stalin was one of the most oppressive dictatorships in recent history, but it justified this oppression as necessary to achieve socialist goals. Finally, Bulgakov makes fun of a lot of the Soviet Union's ideals, but he mostly focuses on a specific one: religion. The Soviet Union under Stalin enacted a strict policy of state atheism, where religion was banned, churches were expropriated by the government, and thousands of priests were killed. The reason for this was that Lenin was the one to describe religion as the opium of the masses, an instrument of oppressive capitalism to keep workers weak and submissive. Bulgakov lived through the most violent stages of this process, and he wasn't able to oppose it publicly, but he did so anyway by pointing out in The Master and Margarita that denying religion like this is not only wrong and irrational, but also pointless. Why? Because some things, like helping others for no individual benefit, like when Margarita literally sells her soul to the devil to get the Master to be happy, are just right, no matter what you believe in. According to Bulgakov, religion is not a factor to behave morally, and when the Soviets did so many immoral things to persecute religion in the name of their socialist ideals, like persecuting and killing all the priests and people who still practice their religion, was just counterproductive. My students, with the help of Grade Saver's study guide about this book, would also like to point out that the characters in this book, despite being atheists, constantly use the phrase, "Oh gods, oh gods." So yeah. There's also that. I will end this video by quoting one of the most famous parts of the book, which is about how ideas are real and powerful, no matter how much authorities try to oppress them or society doesn't understand them. But tell me, why does Margarita call you the Master? That is an excusable weakness. She has too high an opinion of a novel I wrote. And what is the novel about? It is a novel about Pontius Pilate. Here again, the tongues of the candles swayed and leaped. The dishes on the table clattered. Voland burst into thunderous laughter, but neither frightened nor surprised anyone. Behemoth applauded for some reason. About what? About what? About who? And now that's stupendous. Couldn't you have found another subject? Let me see it. Unfortunately, I cannot do that, because I burned it in the stove. Forgive me, but I don't believe you. That cannot be. Manuscripts don't burn. Come on, Behemoth, let's have the novel. The cat instantly jumped off the chair, and everyone saw that he had been sitting on a thick stack of manuscripts. With a bow, the cat gave the top copy to Voland. Margarita trembled and cried out, again shaken to the point of tears. The manuscript, it's here! All powerful, all powerful! Remember, students, your ideas are valuable, and manuscripts do not burn. This video was actually made with the help of my students, who read this book and presented it to the class. I hope you learned something. See you next time!